And so in my theory of consciousness, one, the totality of what exists, wants to know itself. That's the fundamental purpose and motivation for all of evolution is one wanting to know itself. And every time one knows itself, it creates an entity that, like him, I should say it or whatever, but like it, you know, wants to know itself and has the power to do so. He has an identity that maintains that identity, grows, evolves, and so on. So the evolution of the physical universe is the evolution of the symbolic forms that are used for these entities to communicating with each other to actually have an experience of who they are, because knowing can only occur as an inner experience. Qualia are simply the carriers of meaning. So in this way, also you can see that information that in physics is simply symbolic and has no meaning whatsoever, is simply the probability, is connected to the probability of an event. In this new theory, information has an inner reality, which is the meaning, and it also has an outer reality, which is the symbolic aspect that are used to communicate that, exactly like the information is for us. I use information and I call information what is supposed to represent meaning that I have inside of me to communicate with you. And in science, that meaning has been erased. Shannon information simply has no connection whatsoever with information, only has connection with the symbolic aspect of, of reality and with the probability that these symbols might appear or not. That's it. The concept of truth for me um, is much more nuanced than the concept of truth, in any mathematical sense, or because even the concept of truth in any mathematical sense relies on assumed truth, which is the truth of the assumptions or postulates the one has used to then have the logical discourse that follows. So it is impossible to know the truth of the postulates, and therefore it's impossible to claim that any theorem based on those postulates could necessarily be true. They are true within the system, the axiomatic system, the ones that's chosen. So, but what is truth at a deeper level? Frankly, nobody knows, and I don't think that it can be known. In fact, if one, I start from the principle that one desires to know itself. One is the totality of what exists, wants to know itself. So if one wants to know itself, is actually seeking the truth of himself, and he doesn't know yet. So the truth doesn't exist, well made, already listed somewhere, like like a bit like the Platonic truth of forms. I do not subscribe to that idea at all, which is a crucial starting point of most mathematicians, to believe that all the forms that ever existed or will ever exist already exist. Um, I don't believe that at all, because that would correspond to saying that one already knows everything about himself. In other words, that one is omniscient. I don't believe in a one that is omniscient. It would make no sense if knowing is foundational and one knows already everything about himself. He doesn't know to build the. He doesn't need to build the world made of entities like us that are part wholes of what he is or it is, to actually help itself know itself. We are emanations of one that want to know itself in order for one to know itself. We are collaborating with each other because we are aspects of one. We contain one within, and we want to know ourselves. So the truth is what I have direct knowing of, but it is also relative to me. So it's not an absolute truth. So, in suffering to me is a condition of consciousness when someone is not is not heeding the urge that we all have to know ourselves and to know the world as ourselves from our point of view. So in this context, if we accept this context, then truth is an evolving thing. And is an ever-growing thing, and it is synonymous with self-knowing of one. The only reason to introduce the notion of one in my model and theory is that there has to be that there is a totality of what exists that is evolving, and that has to have certain characteristics, like it has to be dynamic, creative, and holistic, because those are the characteristics that already quantum physics is showing to be part of the reality that the best reality that we know. So, so we had to start already with a concept that is the point of arrival of the best theory that we have, and that extends them and generalizes them. So one is the totality of what exists, but also the totality of what doesn't exist yet, which is the potentiality of one that needs to manifest and reveal itself to one. And the purpose of one is to know itself. And but in knowing itself, one creates units of consciousness, like the monads of Leibniz, entities that, like itself, want to know themselves, and they have the means to do that. So they're, I call them part wholes, because they contain the essence of one within. And I made the example of our body, which is a quantum and classical physical structure, so it's not even a conscious being per se. The consciousness is something that has created that body, that is behind it, is vaster than the body itself. Even the body is built of part wholes, because each of our cells, and we have 50 trillions of them, contains the genome of the egg that out of which the entire organism developed. So the potential knowledge of everything is contained already in each of the parts of the body, each of the cells. And so in the same manner, then I say we as conscious entities with free will, part wholes of one, have to be part wholes of one, because we're built in the same model with the same structure. Because that's another observation that we had. The reality has a sort of fractal structure, meaning that the same model is repeated at different scales, and so that makes sense. But of course, they had to be taken as self-evident postulates, like any postulate should be. And so one is a necessity to explain why we exist and why we feel moved to do certain things instead of others. You know, by being, in a sense, sons of one, if you want, or daughters of one, if you want to call it that way, we are pursuing the same purpose that one is pursuing, which is to know itself, and to know itself but we are a point of view of one about itself, and that is the essence of the awakening experience that I described earlier. I described an experience where, I observe the world that was me with my point of view, which is a point of view of the world upon itself. And so the how to say, the reason for adopting this is because I experienced it. Exactly the same reason why you adopt a law of physics, by having experiments that show that there is a certain law being obeyed. So, in other words, the starting point is not an intellectual idea that starts from who knows where, but starts from experience. The one becomes the many because being holistic, every time it sees itself, it knows itself, this knowing itself generates an entity that is made of the energy that knows itself. In other words, out of one comes an entity, which is a CU or monad, that has the same capacity of one. Is a self-reflection of one that creates something. And in fact, the principle of life is this principle of generation, self-generation. That there is something that creates something that is like itself as a foundation of reality, of all realities. So life is not a special case in of what happened in this planet, but it is a foundation aspect of one. Every time one knows itself for the first time, it creates a unit, a unit of consciousness, a monad. The name doesn't matter, but it creates something that has the same capacity of itself to know itself and generate other selves like itself in order to continue this process. So, so it is, and the reason why it has to be a part whole, because one, being holistic, is not made of separable parts. So when he sees him, when he knows itself, he has to know it himself entirely. But in then knowing itself entirely, it creates a point of view about itself. If that point of view about itself was all that there was to it, well, if one would have known itself and be done with it. But since one is more than that, it has to create other units of consciousness because after having seen himself in that way, he finds out that that doesn't exhaust who he is, and so who it is, and so he has to create another one, and so on and so forth. You see, so it is inherent in the holistic nature of one that we have to be parts whole. In quantum, in classical physics, all the parts are separable. So, and also they are closed in the sense that they have closed boundaries. They don't talk to each other. They can only act with each other by hitting, so to speak, each other, right? By touching each other, by a direct action. That's what classical physics is talking about, and everything derives from that type of idea. Where in quantum physics, uh, uh, we start talking about systems that are in certain states. So we already the idea of state introduces the idea of information, but an information that, in the case of quantum physics, has a different relationship than the information of a classical system. A classical system is deterministic, and being deterministic, the next state of the system is entirely determined by the previous state and by an algorithm that transforms in a one-to-one fashion the previous state into the following state. And there is nothing is left to chance in classical physics. That's what determinism means. Therefore, the probability of the next state is actually one, because it is what will happen. And that's the type of probability that is used when you do classical statistical physics. The probability of of the states, is always one. But because we don't know, the ontological probability of something is one, but the epistemic probability is, since we don't know what's going to happen, we have to use a probability, because we don't know, but because the state that will happen is already known in some way, because it will happen because of the determinism, then the probability refers in classical physics to something that already exists, but we don't know.